Imagine it's 1942. You're looking out over the Darwin Harbour and you see the wharf reaching southward, a dozen or so warships scattered beyond. There's the Australian Neptuna, closest to the wharf, and around to your right is the USS Peary Destroyer, a land and sea vessel. Darwin, as you know it, looked completely different. Replace the bitumen behind you with a dusty road, and the now prosperous city centre with a bushy town, a couple of hotels, banks, the much-loved Chinatown, and some military offices. On this day, February 19, 1942, there were about 10,000 Australian troops here in Darwin. There were rumours of the Japanese coming towards the nation's frontline after their raid on Pearl Harbor only 2 months earlier. As the sun rose on that humid and clear morning, 188 Japanese fighters and bombers took off from aircraft carriers and flew south towards their target, the first ever raid on Australian soil.
And we heard the noise. Whoa, the sky gone, and everybody looking around, soldiers and all different blokes, walkies and hello, look at it. It's happened to come from the east, where the sunrise was, you see. Next minute, we heard the bomb landed, and next minute it came onto the wharf. Well, this officer with me said, right, I'll get on the staff car and let's get back to Larrakia. I said, what about the other officer? Don't worry about him now, it's too late. He said, the chap's hitting the wharf now, look, they're bombing the wharf.
Army driver Henry Lee. As the alarm sounded, aircraft gunner Jack Mulholland reached for his gun.
Looking up, there were these flights of heavy bombers coming in over Darwin from the south-southeast. Frightening looking things, really, because the skies over Darwin are always so blue and the planes stood out in white crosses. It looked like a gravesite approaching across a blue field.
Sprays of machine gun fire puncture the air around you, and anyone able to move has scrambled for the shelter of a drain or a trench.
Well, just outside of this place where I was living, there's a drain, and I'd often looked at this drain. I'd smelt it, a horrible sort of a place. Well, little did I think that I was going to have to taste the contents of that drain, which I did, because the first thing I did was to go and lay flat down in it, along with quite a number of others. While you're laying down like that, if you don't sort of raise your body a little off the ground, as each bomb falls, and they're big bombs, I can assure you, there's a sort of a nasty tremor in the earth.
A bombing survivor, Mr. Rudman, speaking to the ABC 2 days after the first raid. The raid caught many in the town off guard, as Darwin military historian Dr. Tom Lewis explains.
Well, because the Japanese had cleverly crossed Bathurst and Melville Island and had attacked from the southeast. So people looking up and seeing squadrons of planes coming from that direction automatically do think that they're coming from the south and they must be ours. So it was a clever technique, and it gained them a couple of seconds surprise, which is always a good idea in wartime.
The first Japanese bombs fell on the wharf. They hit the Neptuna and then the post office. Of all 188 Japanese aircraft, only 3 were brought down by Australian and US forces that day.
The trouble was that the land gunners weren't used to firing. They just hadn't engaged the enemy before. The land gunners weren't that ready in that they hadn't been allowed to practice, and their ammunition was old, and quite a lot of it was exploding at the wrong height.
Our gun got one plane, which I saw go down, was a dive bomber. But the ammunition we were using was sadly lacking in that the fuses were probably inferior because of storage and the heat for so long. In fact, we didn't have any practice shoots, was another terrible thing, in that we had no chance of knowing that the ammunition wouldn't perform as it should.
Look, if we had more equipment, more gun there, we would have brought down more planes, because those bomber was coming that low right across these 2-story buildings. That's where the bomber come in. You could see the Japs in them sitting there laughing, going across.
Half an hour after it began, the raid was over. The town was shattered. Shell-shocked survivors rose from the mud, struggled to swim ashore, were rescued by people in boats, and stumbled out into the bush on foot. Not a soul avoided the devastation. The Territory Administrator's wife, Mrs. Abbott, hid under her house, just to the right of you, and she recorded her view when she arose.
When we looked out on our so lovely harbour, no picture of an inferno could equal what we saw. Black smoke rolled in heavy clouds, flames rose in great tongues to the sky. The water near was covered with black oil. In this water, small navy boats were moving, rescuing blackened figures, and men were struggling towards our garden, where the black water was licking the shore.
Just how many people died in the raid on February 19 remains in dispute, but the official record says 247 were killed. The Neptuna and the USS Peary took direct hits and were destroyed, along with 6 other ships, many buildings and oil tanks. The nation was aghast. The attack on Australian soil was a huge threat, something we can barely conceive of nowadays.
We were losing ship after ship in waters north of Australia and coming out backwards. And in many respects, it's our darkest year. It's easy to understand it now, looking back in history, but put yourself in the shoes of people then. What did they think? How did they feel about Australia's future? Was it a time when they thought we were really in great peril? I think for many, especially up here on the front line, they did think it was curtains for Australia, and we better wake people up down south, and we better start fighting for our lives or our country will be no more.